Hey guys, I'm Metagrit. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you my Dark World deck. I've had a lot of fun with this deck competitively, and it's a nice break from playing my typical machine decks. I've also learned a few techniques and tricks from this deck that I can implement into my machine decks that I really enjoy playing. So without any further ado, let's get right into the video. 3 copies of Grapha. This card is really strong. It can destroy your opponent's board. It can also summon itself really easily, so essential to play 3 copies of this because we want to fusion summon that big fusion monster from our extra deck every single turn. 3 copies of Rainbow. It can add Grapha to your hand. It can also summon itself just like Grapha. Really strong card for managing resources and of course turbo summoning your Grapha fusion monster. 3 copies of Snow. This card's really good normal summon. It can also search any Dark World card from your deck. No explanation needed for that decision. 3 copies of Brow. I like to have lots of monsters to discard so I can keep adding cards to my hand and just being able to activate my Dark World spells too, because I don't play dangers in this deck. So 3 copies of Brow for me. 3 copies of Genta. This card is of course really strong. It can summon itself when it's banished, and it can normal summon because it's level 4, and of course you can discard it to search for the Gates of Dark World. It's just a really strong card. 1 copy of Beige and 2 copies of Silva. These cards are really good for managing resources because they can summon themselves when they're discarded. And of course Silva is really OP because you can just shuffle your opponent's hand back into their deck. This card is really strong. Next, we play 1 Salamander Catalyzer, and I only play 1 because you can only activate its first effect once per turn. 1 Nico Main King because this card is really strong, even stronger than Silva in my opinion. You can just discard it using your Grapha Fusion monster on your opponent's turn, and then your opponent's turn is basically over. Then I play 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods. This is the best decision I ever made when I built this deck, was adding this card into it. So you can send Dark World Accession to the graveyard so that you can turbo fusion summon your Grapha Fusion monster right away. That way you don't have to worry about your opponent activating tier limit cards on your turn or using hand traps on you, because you can just negate it with your Grapha Fusion monster. So 3 copies of Foolish Burial Goods so you can get that Dark World Accession into your graveyard and use its effect to add it back to your hand, and then of course use its other effect to fusion summon. 2 copies of the Gates of Dark World. I would play 3 copies of this, and I just really, it's a tough decision. You play 3 copies of it, you can brick. You play 2 copies of it, and then you can't, use Genta's effect to search all 3 copies of it and use them all on the same turn. So, you gotta pick your poison. I play 2 copies of it for now. 3 copies is really good too, I think. Then I play 2 copies of Dark World Accession. There it is, the second copy. I play 2 copies of this card because it's really strong, and one of the coolest things about this card is you can just set 1 card, set this and pass. If you have Grapha and Snow in your hand, then you basically win the duel because you can activate this on your opponent's turn, of course destroy one of your opponent's cards because you discarded Grapha, and then you can of course fusion summon this guy with it so he's a negate. On top of that, if you discarded Snow, you can search using Snow's effect for Silva. And that way you can not only negate one of your opponent's cards with your Grapha Fusion monster, you can shuffle back 2 of their cards from their hand back into their deck. And that's just really, really hard for your opponent to deal with. So sometimes just setting this and passing is all you need to do to win the duel. I play 1 Dark World Archives. This card's really strong. I don't play 2 copies of it because it would just kind of brick. If you draw both in your hand, you only need 1. It's just to draw more cards, and to be able to discard more cards to activate more effects, so on and so forth. 1 copy of Called by the Grave, 1 copy of Into the Void, and 1 copy of Card Destruction. These are my limited cards I play. Called by the Grave is self-explanatory, it's just a strong card. Card Destruction is really strong. I'm not really scared of activating my opponent's cards effects off of this card because I like to fusion summon my Grapha Fusion monster first before I really do anything else. And that way I can negate something if I need to. It is a little bit risky because, you could activate a lot of your opponent's cards with this card, but usually you are getting the benefit of the doubt when you play this card because you're playing Dark Worlds, and you also draw bunch of cards back into your hand off of this card's effect. It can be really broken in this deck, so it's really good. Into the Void for consistency. I also play Into the Void for its effect where you discard your hand at the end of your turn, and that's really strong because if you have the right cards in your hands, you can of course search a lot of different cards. And if you have Dark World Accession set in your back row, then of course you're good to go because you just played one Into the Void and discarded your hand, so you could search out what you needed to. I play 3 copies of Dragged Down to the Grave. This card's one of my favorite cards. You can pick out hand traps from your opponent's hand with this card. Your opponent is basically forced to use Ash if they have Ash in their hand, because otherwise it would get thrown out of their hand. It's just a really strong card. It also lets you discard, lets you draw a card. And the discard effect where your opponent chooses what card to discard really doesn't hurt you, because you can manipulate your hand so that your opponent has to pick something like Snow or something that's beneficial for you to discard anyway. So especially if you're playing the spell version of this deck as opposed to the danger version, you can really manipulate your hand and make sure that you always get the benefit when you play this card. I also play 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. This card is kind of cool. You can obviously get consistency out of this card, and of course you can summon your Genta with this card as well. So it's a cool card. And 3 copies of Dark World Dealings. Again, I'm not too worried about activating my opponent's cards with this, because I will only activate this card usually after I have this on the field. I play 3 Grapha Dragon, the fusion monster. I play 3 because I like to follow up with this card, and I also like to have the option to summon 2 on one turn in case my opponent used Dark Really No More or something like Forbidden Droplet to negate its effects. And if I have my Dark World Accession set in my back row, I can summon another one. So basically my opponent, did absolutely nothing by negating my first one. And of course 3 copies just for the grind game. Play a copy of Hope Harbinger Dragon and a copy of Coat King. Really good rank 8 plays. And of course rank 4 plays. Abyss Dweller and Dugares. Dugares is consistency. Abyss Dweller is really oppressive against certain decks. Access Code Talker for follow-ups. And Saryuja for some more draw power. I play IP Masquerena and just a little package of nightmare monsters to go with her. I also play Appaloosa to go with IP Masquerena, and sometimes I also summon Underworld Goddess of the Closed World using my IP Masquerena. Sometimes I also use Underworld Goddess, summoning her with her own procedures, so it's just a really strong card. And 1 copy of Muttcracker. This card is really strong. If you don't have it, you should pick it up if you're going to play Dark Worlds, because it adds a ton of consistency to the deck. Locks you into Fiends, but that's okay because you summon Fiends with Dark World anyway. So yeah, that's it for this deck, you guys. I will post the whole list in the description below. I highly recommend picking up 3 Dark World structure decks and playing with this deck. You'll learn a lot from it, you'll have a lot of fun, and it's super competitive, and especially with the new ban list coming out, it could be one of the best decks out there. So highly recommend playing some Dark Worlds. It's really fun, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, duel on.